A live look that we do have over Jerusalem here in Israel. It's a camera that you have seen a lot over the past several years. Now, President Trump is expressing disappointment after the Hamas terror group failed to return all of the bodies of deceased hostages as promised in the peace deal released last week. I want to show you this post from President Trump just a bit earlier today here on Truth Social, as he said all 20 hostages are back and feeling as good as can be expected. A big burden has been lifted, but the job is not done. The dead have not been returned as promised. Phase 2 begins right now. Again, that was a post today from President Trump on Truth Social. On Monday, Hamas freed all 20 living hostages kidnapped 2 years ago, and it agreed to return the bodies of 28 slain hostages. However, only 4 were released to Israel, leaving lawmakers and the families of those hostages to call on Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to do something about this, to hold Hamas accountable and return all of the bodies. We also did get this post a short time ago from the Israel Defense Forces saying 4 coffins of deceased hostages escorted by IDF and ISA forces crossed the border into the state of Israel a short while ago and are on their way to the National Institute for Forensic Medicine, where identification procedures will be carried out. IDF representatives are accompanying the families. The IDF urges the public to act with sensitivity and wait for official identification, which will first be communicated to the families of those deceased hostages. Now, there is a lot to discuss here, so I do want to bring in Congresswoman Jen Kiggans, a Republican representing Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us to talk about all of this.
Thanks for having me tonight, for sure.
Of course. And first off, I do want to start by asking you here about this whole situation, the peace deal that was brokered by President Donald Trump. It is a U.S. brokered deal, and there is now this ceasefire between Israel and Hamas that is in effect. Where does that maybe place the U.S. when it comes to the Middle East and potential peace talks in other wars that are ongoing?
Yeah, this was it was a historic day yesterday for sure. And we're so grateful for President Trump and this administration's just peace through strength approach. Really, when you look how he's been leading on the world stage and what he's done even within, less than 1 year, and to have an end to the conflict between Israel and Gaza and have the return of all of the living hostages and hopefully eventually all of the deceased ones as well. I mean, this is truly just historic times. President Trump has been a strong supporter of Israel and very pro-Israel since day one. So I think, what we're seeing is stark contrast to what we saw with the Biden administration and that weakness on the world stage and him being even confused and looking lost, when he was with other leaders. And right now we see President Trump with almost all, significant world leaders standing behind him and on the same page. And we know that we're stronger together. And as a person who represents a large military district, I couldn't be more proud of his peace through strength approach. We need to make sure that peace is certainly at the forefront and that by all means, we will make sure we keep that peace. So I'm thankful for what's happening.
I wanted to ask you about the situation that I just talked about and you mentioned here. We know that 4 coffins of hostages who were deceased, they were killed, slain there while they were in Hamas captivity or, of course, kidnapped on October 7th. 4 coffins returned yesterday and 4 coffins returned today. That is 8 of the 28 hostages who we are told are dead and did remain in Hamas captivity. So my question for you, is that concerning at this point to see something like that?
Yeah, I certainly hope that we will retrieve the remaining remains of the deceased, and it's a step in the right direction. But I know that was one of the things, the components of the peace deal, was that we receive all of the remains. And I'm wondering if Hamas even knows where all of the remains are. But I hope that there are teams of investigative teams that we can send in that can search for those remains, that can get some answers for those families who are missing loved ones.
Speaker Mike Johnson did mention, he's actually mentioned a few times here, that he supports Netanyahu's efforts to award President Trump a Nobel Peace Prize for this situation specifically, talking about an essential end, a potential end there to the war in Gaza. This ceasefire still intact days later. So my question for you, why do you feel that President Trump deserves that award?
Yeah, when you look at what he's done, not just in Israel but throughout the world, and what happened in Iran recently with the bombing of their nuclear facilities, and he's put China on notice, and even what's going on with Ukraine, and putting Putin on notice as well. He's really letting the world know that America is back, and together we will make sure we stand up to our adversaries. So I think there's definitely an argument to be made about why President Trump deserves to have that Nobel Peace Prize, and I would support Mike Johnson. I know our conference would in those efforts as well. That's certainly a great honor to be given that award. But at this point, I can think of no one more deserving, and I know Prime Minister Netanyahu has made that clear as well. And Trump has been a staunch supporter of Israel ever since he's been in office, even in his first term, and moving the U.S. embassy, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and signing the Abraham Accords, and then now the return of all living hostages, and hopefully all the remains of the rest of the hostages as well, and working towards, he's got a 20-step plan for peace, and this peace in the Middle East. I mean, it's remarkable, and we have not seen anything like this, especially a stark contrast again from the last administration, where we were going in the other directions, and we saw wars being started in that chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. We killed Americans. And then we saw the start of the conflict in Israel and the start of the conflict in Ukraine, and we saw China being much more aggressive. So this administration has certainly put the world on notice, and I think things are definitely turned around.
And this is actually a post from Axios that I want to pop up right here, because it says new Mike Johnson, the Israeli speaker, to rally for Trump getting the 2026 Nobel Peace Prize. It appears that the deadline is next January. So they do have quite a bit of time to actually put in that nomination and get it through. That Nobel Peace Prize this year just awarded. So I did want to show you that right here. Now, on that same note, you were talking about previous administrations, but I did want to ask you about some comments here by Prime Minister Netanyahu as he spoke to the Knesset yesterday alongside President Trump. He did call President Trump the greatest friend that has ever been in the White House ever. What do you make of that, and what does that say to you about maybe the relationship there between the U.S. and Israel as it stands right now?
Yeah, I know that those two have certainly a personal friendship as well, but President Trump has just been a staunch supporter of Israel from day one and really hasn't wavered. And we didn't see that with the last administration. We saw them trying to appease their base and go back and forth with even not protest some of the pro-Palestine protests that we saw on college campuses. The Biden administration would not take action on, but Trump has been a stark difference, and it's just because he believes in that peace through strength part. And I think we'll continue to see him stand with Israel, and to make sure he speaks out against anti-Semitism, even in our own country and on college campuses. And you're going to see that partnership remain. And we know that Israel is our closest ally in the Middle East. And so President Trump will continue to stand by them. And I support that effort, have been a strong supporter as well. And we need to make sure that the Middle East knows that we stand with our closest ally. We are partnered together in this, and that we're stronger together as well.
And this is a post here on social media from the Prime Minister's office saying Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked President Trump for his efforts to expand the circle of peace through strength. That was the message in the Knesset, as we heard from both Netanyahu and Trump just yesterday. Now, do you believe that this peace deal effectively marks the end of the war in Gaza altogether?
I certainly hope so. I know that was the goal of this peace deal. And again, having so many world leaders share the stage with President Trump yesterday in Egypt, when we saw not just European leaders, but leaders from Middle Eastern countries. And they were all together, all hopeful for peace, and all in agreement that we were to sign the peace accords, and that it would be a process. This isn't going to happen overnight. There's been a lot of turmoil. There's a long history of war and conflict in that region. So I know with President Trump really spearheading and leading this effort, and he is well respected in the international community. When you look at the world leaders that came to the United States a few months ago and met with him to talk about international and foreign affairs, especially about Ukraine and Russia, but now to share a stage with him in the Middle East and to talk about peace in the Middle East. I mean, he has some staunch allies in this quest for peace. And the fact that he supports our military in this peace through strength effort, and I representing a large military district, and the investment that President Trump has made through the Working Families Tax Plan. We have the $150 billion Defense Plus up. He is committed to paying our military, even despite this chaotic Schumer shutdown, government shutdown that we're in right now. He will make sure our troops get paid, including our Coast Guard. So he stands with our military men and women in this country. And we know that, and there will be funding to support that. So that's just a part of our strength piece, but that strength will equal world peace.
And on that note here, my final question for you, do you think as you look at this ceasefire and the other wars that, President Trump has said he ended, he's made different agreements there between several countries. We're talking, I want to say 5, 6, or 7 at this point. But when you look at Ukraine and Russia in that situation, does something like this open the doors to some kind of peace deal between the two of them? Because Zelensky has actually been invited to the White House on Friday. The two of them are going to meet and speak once again. So does that open the door for an end to that conflict?
Yeah, I certainly hope so in that regard as well. And President Trump has made it very clear that he desires world peace. And there's no better legacy to leave for an administration than to achieve that peace. And that's the name of the game, right? And again, his support of the military, and I'm a Navy veteran, represent a large Navy district. That's strength piece. I mean, that's how you deter wars. That's how you achieve world peace. Stark contrast from Joe Biden with the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I mean, that led to multiple conflicts, and we are not seeing that. This president is night and day, and I couldn't be more proud of his foreign policy stances, his prioritization of strength through peace. That's more important than anything, because if we don't have world peace, nothing else will matter. So the fact that we have a president who prioritizes that right now makes me sleep better at night, and I couldn't be more grateful for the work he's doing.
Representative Jen Kiggans, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and discuss a variety of topics there. Anything else that you want to add? Anything we missed here before I let you go?
Yeah, just a special thank you to our servicemen and women who are in uniform right now and who are deployed throughout the world. We know that you all are standing the watch and you are the tip of the spear. And because you are in key places like that, we do have peace and we do have your back. And it's just a privilege to represent a district that is home to so many military members.
All right, Congresswoman, thank you again for taking the time to be here. We definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And as I mentioned, President Zelensky of Ukraine will be in the U.S. later on this week. I do want to read you this post here coming in from the president. He does say there is now a very strong momentum for peace in the world following the agreements reached for the Middle East. This is a global issue, and much has been done personally by the President of the United States and his team. Various other leaders were also involved. They help, and now the Middle East has a real chance to live without war. It shows that Russia, too, can indeed be pressured into ending its aggression. In fact, it is Russia that now remains the main source of global instability, the global source of war. That source must be shut off, and we know how. We will have much more on that trip as it gets closer. And of course, on Friday, we'll bring you continuous coverage of everything that happens as Zelensky and Trump meet at the White House.